My name is Delara, 29 years old. The air inside St. Catherine's felt humid with lilies and whispers, a sweet, suffocating perfume that clung to the vaulted ribs of the church, the way shame clings to skin. From the shadowed choir loft, where dust motes drifted like slow snow in the stained glass light, I watched a world I was forbidden to enter unspool beneath me, pastel suits, lacquered hair, crystal laughter. A string quartet braided something triumphal through the murmurs. It was the society wedding of the year, according to the cousins' posts I wasn't supposed to see. It was my sister's wedding. It was the one I had been told, so gently it cut, was family only. "Give your sister her moment, dear," my mother had said 2 weeks ago, voice soft as a napkin folded over a knife. "Don't make this about you." But the secrecy had always felt precisely about me. The way calls were ignored, texts returned with emojis instead of answers. The way Lena's so-called fiancé was perpetually traveling, ill, shy, private enough to require a wall of silence tall as a cathedral. Private enough to turn my parents' faces into polished masks. Down the center aisle, a river of silk and expectations flowed toward the altar. I pressed my palms to the warm wood of the railing until my knuckles blanched. My plain black dress disappeared into the loft's gloom. A scarf hid the hair every relative recognized instantly. My pulse mimicked the organ's pedal notes, low, relentless, impossible to ignore. It had started like a splinter 6 months ago. Something under the skin I couldn't see but couldn't stop feeling. Sunday dinners rescheduled. Photo captions with strategic crops that caught a man's sleeve. Never his face. "He's private," Lena said on the one call she did not send to voicemail. "And you can be a bit much." The word hung there, glittering. Much. As if my existence had always been an overflowing glass she was forced to mop up. The heavy oak doors swung open. A hush fell over the pews like velvet. There she was, Lena, framed by the doorway's gold, her dress a waterfall of lace that looked delicate enough to bruise. Her smile shone the way a blade shines when you turn it just so. She scanned her kingdom, the donors, the bosses, the friends who'd learned how to orbit, and basked in the collective adoration. A queen, crowned and unchallenged. On her arm stood the groom, his back to me, tall, squared shoulders in a tuxedo shaved to perfection. The sight plucked a taut string in my chest. My breath shortened. I leaned forward until the railing bit into my ribs. There was something about the set of his neck, the precise way he shifted his weight, the cut of his hair above the collar. Familiar the way a recurring dream is familiar. "Turn," I begged silently. "Please, turn." He angled his head to murmur something into Lena's ear. Sun through stained glass slid over the sharp line of his jaw, found the scar just in front of the ear, tiny as a hyphen, the one I used to kiss without thinking. The light brushed a cufflink, black enamel, rectangular, inlaid with a sliver of mother of pearl. I'd searched 3 shops to find that pair the winter he made partner. My heart misfired. "Not possible," I told the air. "Not possible, not possible, not—" The organ swelled. The congregation rose. He turned fully then, and the world inverted as cleanly as a coin flipped. The same dark eyes that warmed when he read my texts at midnight. The mouth I knew by heart. The face I pressed into my pillow to remember when he traveled for conferences. Julian, my husband. Sound telescoped. The quartet's bright ribbons of music thinned to a wire. Lily sweetness soured into rot. The marble floor below looked suddenly fathomless. A polished lake that could swallow a person whole. My hands, gripping the rail, were no longer mine, cold, senseless. I thought of this morning's coffee cup in our sink, the ring of cinnamon he always forgot to rinse, the shirt he'd draped over the chair. "Chicago," he'd said, brushing my cheek with a kiss. "Back Monday. I love you." He smelled then like cedar and mint. Down below, he smelled like a man who never left town at all. My gaze snagged on my parents in the front pew. Mother's lace handkerchief lifted to just the right tearful angle. Father's jaw set with paternal pride. Their bodies made a perfect tableau. The proud, the moved, the righteous. My stomach lurched. They knew. They had to have known. You don't smile like that at an accident. You don't glow that hard by mistake. The minister's voice rolled outward, warm and weighty. Words like sacred and bond and honor floated up to roost among the rafters where 100 choirs had once sung about mercy. I thought of the night 3 months back when I came home early and found Julian in our bedroom, phone angled away. "Work," he'd said, too quickly. "Big client, you know how it is." I hadn't known how it was. I had decided to trust instead. Some days, faith is just fear with better PR. If anyone knows a reason these two should not be joined. A murmur rippled, an inhalation, a prayer, a dare. The sentence dangled over the aisle like a bridge built for me alone. I imagined standing. I imagined the way the pews would creak as heads snapped back to find the ghost in the loft. I imagined my voice breaking across stone. He can't marry her. He already married me. But I didn't move. I couldn't trust my legs, and beneath the paralysis coiled something colder than fear, calculation. If I spoke, the story would become mine to defend and theirs to destroy. Unstable. Jealous. Obsessed. I had already heard the words from 2 jeweled strangers by a bathroom door at a fundraiser. They fit too neatly to be improvised. I could see the future snap into place, Lena weeping, Julian solemn, my parents firm with sorrow. "We tried to help her," they would say, "but she's always been much." I was not going to audition for the part they'd written. "Do you, Julian Alexander Thorne, take—" "I do," he said, and a seam ran through me from throat to sternum, clean as a tailor's cut. The woman who saved his voicemails, who pressed her wedding ring into the soap dish each night like a ritual, who bought the right cufflinks and the right arguments and the right illusion of being chosen. She loosened, thread by thread. "Do you, Lena Marie Ashford, take—" "I do," Lena breathed, eyes half closed, performing surprise at happiness. She had always been a virtuoso of getting what she wanted. I'd thought once that some wants were beneath even her reach. "You may kiss the bride." He kissed my sister with a zeal that made even the quartet's bows hitch. Applause flared. Cameras rose like a field of sunflowers turning in unison. My teeth found my lower lip and bit until iron flooded my mouth. A drop of blood touched my tongue, small and precise. Pain, I learned in nursing school, can feel like clarity when the body needs a single true thing to hold. They turned, linked, beaming. He faced us, faced me, and for one glancing second his gaze broke away from the aisle and climbed, searching. It snagged on the dark of the loft. Maybe he saw no one. Maybe he saw only his fear reflected back, that private things hate light. Or maybe, because he knows the way my silences behave, he felt my eyes on him and understood there are ghosts you can't hire security to keep out. They began their procession, moving through an air softened by blessing. White petals scattered, catching in the train. A toddler in a miniature suit drummed his heels and giggled. An aunt dabbed her cheeks theatrically and checked who was watching. My parents rose to follow the new couple. I saw my mother turn halfway, reflexively scanning for a second daughter who was not invited to be anyone's pride today. She looked right through me, as if the loft were a mirror and I had no face. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. A calendar notification. "Julian, O'Hare flight 11:10 a.m. The alert pulsed on the lock screen like a small, mean joke. I thumbed it closed and caught my reflection ghosted over the wallpaper, a faint oval suspended above the nave. I remembered a winter night on our couch when Julian had kissed my temple and said, "Intimate is better than spectacle, Del. Big weddings are for people who need witnesses." I had laughed, grateful to be the kind of love that didn't need proving. Below, Lena and Julian paused at the doors to receive the congregation's adoration. The organ broke into something bright and expensive. Rice would be wasteful, I imagined her saying. Rice is for people who don't know roses. She had roses in crates, mile after mile of them, enough to upholster a day. I lifted my hand from the rail and flexed my fingers until the blood returned. There would be a reception at the Grand View, with chandeliers hung like captive moons and a sweetheart table for the freshly stunning. There would be speeches, my father's voice wobbling with pride, Julian's polished gratitude, Lena's performative humility. There would be photos captioned with words like "finally" and always, and privacy respected. And I would not be there. That had been the plan. I have never enjoyed disobeying as much as I did in that moment. The quartet softened. The last of the guests drifted toward the doors in a sugar-light buzz. In the lulls of music, I could hear the little sounds a church makes when no one is listening, wood settling, a distant pipe exhaling, a hymn book closing somewhere as if a careful hand had finished reading. I stayed very still and let my heart slow inside my ribs. Stained glass saints watched from their niches, unblinking, accustomed to human vows and human failures. I had a choice, I realized. Not the old one, scream or swallow, but a new architecture entirely. Observe, record, preserve. If they wanted a story with me as the ghost who wailed and vanished, I could deny them that. Ghosts, after all, don't keep receipts. I pulled the scarf tighter over my hair and stood, legs finally steady. My throat still burned with lilies. My palms smelled of wax and wood. I took one last look at the altar where promises had just been spoken in a language I used to believe I understood. Then I turned toward the narrow stair and began to descend, lightheaded and lucid, toward a day that had already decided what it was, and a version of me that would decide something else. They wanted quiet. I would give the world silence, with teeth. I used to think the story of our family could be told by the kitchen tiles. In the daylight, the grout lines ran straight as rules. At night, the fluorescent bulb hummed and every hairline crack revealed itself. Madison Ashford white tiles, my mother joked when we moved in, because the shade matched my sister's teeth in her homecoming photos. Lena sprawled on the counter with her perfect smile and her longer legs, and my father said, "Careful, princess," while I learned the choreography of moving around her. That was the geometry of our house. Lena at the center, me calculating angles in the margins. I was not unloved. It was more intricate than that. I was loved when I was useful, loved when I was quiet, loved when my achievements arrived without causing anyone to rearrange their schedule. Lena drew spotlights to her like weather. When she joined cheer, the family calendar bloomed with away games and fundraisers. When I got an academic scholarship, my mother clipped the announcement, then used the back of the clipping to write the grocery list. I don't think she meant harm. She believed in polish, in optics. Lena made sense in photographs. I made sense in long paragraphs no one had time to read. Our fights were never screaming matches. They were subtler frictions, an eye roll that traveled like a rumor, a compliment waited to bruise. "You look so competent," Lena said on Thanksgiving, the year I chopped all my hair and buried myself in prereqs. When I got into nursing school, my mother pressed my hands in the doorway and called me practical, the way other mothers said brilliant. Practical women, in her world, kept households running and didn't ask the table to turn toward them. The night I met Julian, I was 2 shifts into a week whose edges had frayed. The hospital fundraiser glittered with rented chandeliers and platters of food the oncology parents couldn't pronounce. I wore my good black dress, the one that made me feel like a yes instead of a maybe, and a name tag that announced me as Delara, Pediatrics. "Donors love a story," my supervisor warned. "Smile like you have one." I stood by the silent auction orchids and tried to decide which would be the lesser sin, hope or hunger. He appeared the way some people appear, as if a room had expected him all along. Dark suit, clean lines, a tie knotted with the kind of attention that suggests a life of being seen. He said my name like he'd chosen it for me. "Delara," he repeated, tasting the syllables. "What does it mean?" "Adorned," I said, surprising myself by telling the truth. "Persian. My grandmother's word," he smiled, small, private. "It suits you." We drifted, talking, and I noticed the kinds of things he noticed, the volunteer with sore feet, the couple fighting gently with their eyebrows near the bar, the way the MC mispronounced a nurse practitioner's last name and didn't catch himself. He asked what I loved about my work and didn't blink when the answer took more than a sentence. He spoke about his clients with a reverence I mistook for ethics. "Consulting is boring unless you remember the money touches people," he said, voice lowered as if sharing a creed. "What you stabilize are someone's nights of sleep." It sounded like promise. It sounded like a man who had done something ugly once and vowed not to again. When I introduced him to my parents 3 weeks later, the glow around him didn't dim in our dining room's overhead light. My mother's approval landed in my lap like a warm animal. "He's wonderful, darling," she said, squeezing my wrist hard enough to leave half moons. My father clapped Julian on the shoulder and poured him the good scotch saved for bosses and holidays. Their faces softened as if they were remembering something they'd misplaced, pride maybe, and in the memory, they had always meant to give it to me. Lena arrived late, flanked by her perfume and opinions. She kissed my cheek, then Julian's, a fraction too close to the corner of his mouth to be polite, then retreated to my mother's sideboard mirror to adjust what did not need adjusting. "So," she said, returning, eyes bright, "our Dell finally found someone who can keep up." The compliment was a knife she'd honed on both edges. Julian laughed, light, a sound he used to smooth furniture and feelings. "I'm the lucky one," he said. He looked at me when he said it. I stored it where I kept the proofs that my life could be different from the one I'd rehearsed. After dinner, as we bundled leftovers and performed the little ballet of goodbye, I caught something strange on Lena's face, a hunger that wasn't about wanting food. I'd seen it when we were girls, and I'd gotten a teacher's approval she thought belonged to her. It was small and fast, a flicker, the way a fox crosses a road at dusk. When I blinked, Lena was smiling again, already telling our mother which bakery would do her next birthday cake, and why my suggestion, though sweet, didn't photograph as well. Our wedding was small because Julian said intimacy tasted better than applause. "It'll be ours," he whispered against my hair when we signed the paperwork in the judge's chambers. Just a handful of friends, and the way he cupped my elbow like something valuable. I wore a cream dress that didn't belong to any catalog, and carried a little clutch with my grandmother's amulet tucked inside, hidden, stubborn. Lena sent a text with confetti. My mother sent an email titled "Proudest" with a body that read, simply, "You made a lovely choice." If I wanted more, I told myself that wanting was gaudy. At first, marriage felt like moving from winter into a house with heat. There were flowers for no reason, and dinners cooked with music in the background, and a bed that learned our names. There were Mondays when he pressed a kiss to my temple at dawn and said, "Leave the dishes. I've got them tonight." And Mondays when I said it back. He unlearned little stiffnesses, and I taught my body it didn't have to be on guard. When he traveled, he sent photos of room service menus and city lights, small proofs of existence. I learned the taste of airports on his clothes and decided it was the taste of someone striving. But houses breathe. In the second year, the air shifted. Passwords changed. It was subtle. I almost missed it. I'd reach for the laptop to check our shared calendar. He preferred I handle the logistics. And find the login screen a stranger. "Security at work," he said easily. "Don't worry." Receipts crept into his pockets from restaurants we never went to. "Client dinners," he said, eyes soft. They blur. A Tuesday smelled like perfume I didn't wear. "The client's wife," he joked, rolling his eyes. "Very European. You know how it is." And then there was Lena. It would be dishonest to say she was the kind of sister who celebrated my joy without calculation. She preferred hers measurable and public. She preferred mine manageable and small. Still, there were dinners when she let me tell a story without steering it to her dock. There were texts, memes, a video of our childhood dog snoring. The drift didn't happen suddenly. It was a tide going out in centimeters. Invitations dried. Family updates reached me secondhand. When I asked about the man on her Instagram, a wrist here, a suit cuff there, she smiled like a cat hearing a can opener. "He's private," she said, like she'd learned a new expensive word. "I want to protect this." For a while, I believed her. I wanted to. Because if I didn't, I'd have to notice other things. The way my mother ducked my questions with a, "You know your sister," the way my father hummed and changed the subject to yard work, the way Lena's eyes glittered when someone mentioned my marriage, as if she'd swallowed a coin and enjoyed the weight. There is a memory I keep replaying now that I know how it ends, not because it explains everything, but because it was the first time my body understood something my mind refused. It was a summer evening. Heat lay over the city like a damp sheet. Julian and I were late to Sunday dinner because his car had a warning light on and he refused to let me drive. We arrived flustered, laughing, the kind of late that makes you hold hands a little tighter. In the kitchen, as I set the salad down, I felt eyes on my back. Cool, measuring. Lena stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching us like a scientist with a clipboard. When Julian reached for a glass on the top shelf and his shirt lifted, exposing the small scar near his hip, Lena looked away so quickly it wasn't a flinch. It was a rehearsal. I felt a chill even though the AC hadn't caught up to the day. "You two are disgusting," she teased a minute later, swanning past us for the olive oil, shoulder brushing his casually, expertly. "All this happiness." She said it like a charm and a curse at once. My mother laughed. "Let them be, darling." Then to me, under her breath, fond as a whisper, "Don't smother him. Men like air." When Lena announced an engagement on social media 6 months before this wedding day, I learned about it from a cousin's heartsplosion caption. My phone filled with screenshots before my own sister called me. When I finally reached her, her voice had the exact pitch people use when they ask for a manager. "It happened fast," she said, "and you can be intense. I don't want to scare him." I swallowed the old humiliation, the old training. "We'll do dinner," I suggested, trying to sound airy, unthreatening, small. "Just the 4 of us." "He's private," she said again, savoring the word. "After the wedding." After the wedding. It sits now like a stone in a shoe that was always a size too tight. The last time I asked my mother directly who the man was, she turned from the sink like someone caught with a cigarette. "Give your sister her moment," she said. "Don't make this about you." I didn't know what this was, her marriage or my assigned role. Family only, the invitation that never came had whispered without arriving. Family, an elastic word, stretched until it snapped back and stung. If you asked me to locate the exact second the story shifted from a life to a plot, I'd choose an ordinary morning 10 days before Lena's wedding. Julian came out of the shower humming a tune from a commercial, water still beating on his shoulders. He reached for the cufflinks I'd given him, black enamel, mother of pearl, rolled them in his palm as if remembering a speech he'd once delivered perfectly and could deliver again. He slid them into his shirt, glanced at me in the mirror, and smiled the smile that had sold me a future. "Big week," he said. "Conference in Chicago. I'll be back Monday." He kissed my temple and smelled like cedar, mint, and something I couldn't name that day. Now I can. It was the smell of someone rehearsing a story with no room for me in it. I don't think villains are born. I think they grow out of rooms where some people are allowed to be large and others are taught to fold. Most days, I folded neatly. The day my husband kissed my sister at the end of a white aisle, I remembered every crease. And still, even now, I can tell you the exact moment I decided I would not be their assigned character. It wasn't grand. It wasn't a vow whispered under stained glass. It was the quiet thought that arrived with the speed of truth. If love is a ledger, and they think I'm just a write-off, then I will do what auditors do. I will count. I remember the first time I realized silence could lie. It was 3 months after our wedding, a night thick with rain that blurred the city into watercolor. I'd fallen asleep on the couch waiting for Julian to come home. The apartment still smelled like the rosemary chicken I'd made hours earlier. When the door finally opened near midnight, he moved quietly, like someone entering a museum, not a home. "Long night?" I asked, sitting up. He smiled that gentle, apologetic smile, the one that could sand the edges off anything sharp. "Client dinner ran over. You know how it goes." I nodded, though I didn't. There were no stains on his tie, no hint of wine or garlic, just the faintest trace of perfume. Not mine. I told myself it was someone from the restaurant. I told myself a lot of things that year. Our apartment had the kind of charm that photographs well but lives small. A brick wall with fairy lights, a couch too narrow for comfort. I thought of it as our cocoon, 2 people building a future, 1 takeout box and Netflix password at a time. But cocoons are quiet for a reason. They're made for transformation, not comfort. Julian worked more, traveled more, smiled less. When he was home, he was attentive in bursts, grand gestures that felt almost like guilt in disguise. "You work so hard," he'd say, presenting flowers wrapped in paper that still smelled of the corner bodega. "You deserve the world, Del." I'd laugh, flattered, uneasy. "I'll settle for you making dinner sometime." He'd grin, promise, forget. Still, I told myself we were solid. We had routines, jokes, the kind of shorthand that meant intimacy or dependency, depending on the lighting. Every Sunday morning, I'd read patient charts over coffee while he scrolled the business section. Every Sunday night, he'd fall asleep to his podcasts, and I'd lie awake listening to the static between words. 6 months before Lena's wedding, the first crack widened. He was packing for yet another conference, this time in Boston. I was folding his shirts, sliding his cufflinks into their case, when he said, almost casually, "Your family's planning something big, right? Your sister mentioned an event." My hands stilled. "You talked to Lena?" "Just a quick call. She needed a referral for a marketing client. Small world." Lena had never once asked me for professional help. She'd always preferred to prove she could network without my shadow touching her success. "Oh," I said, "didn't realize you two talked." He shrugged. "Your mom picked up the phone first. You know how she is, chatty." I didn't. My mother never called him unless she wanted something. I told myself I was being paranoid, that marriage rewires what trust feels like. But the next day, when I mentioned it to my mother, her tone faltered just enough to confirm the truth before she smoothed it away. "Yes, dear, I believe your sister needed advice about, something financial. Julian was kind enough to help. Don't overthink it." Don't overthink it. That was the refrain of my upbringing. Every time I felt the itch of imbalance, someone handed me that phrase like a sedative. The months that followed blurred into a slow choreography of distance. The messages from Lena dwindled to polite updates. Our parents stopped including me in Sunday dinners because Lena's fiancé prefers smaller gatherings. One night, I asked Julian if he'd ever met the mysterious man. He hesitated, half a heartbeat too long. "No, just heard about him through your mom." Then he laughed, easy, practiced. "I'm starting to think the guy's imaginary." I laughed too, but my stomach sank. It was the kind of joke people make when they're testing whether you already know. At the hospital, life pulsed forward with a rhythm that didn't care about anyone's heartbreak. Children came and went. Machines beeped their endless Morse code of need. My patients were tiny, breakable humans whose parents clung to me like I was oxygen. I poured everything I had into them because at least there, my care meant something measurable. A fever broke. A chart improved. At home, care meant waiting for texts, for calls, for explanations that never arrived fully formed. I started drawing again, architectural sketches like I used to do before nursing swallowed my time. It felt like constructing order in pencil. Clean lines, predictable symmetry. I sketched our apartment, the view from the window, the curve of Julian's wrist on the nightstand. I drew what I could control. Then came the phone call. I was charting patient notes when my phone buzzed. Lena's name. It startled me. She rarely called anymore. "Hey," I said, forcing cheer. "Long time." Her voice was smooth, rehearsed. "Del, hi, listen, I wanted to tell you before you see it online, I'm engaged." My pen froze mid-sentence. "Engaged? Wow, that's fast." "I know," she laughed, brittle. "It just feels right. You'll meet him soon." "Can't wait," I said, and hated the way my voice trembled. "What's his name?" A pause, light but lethal. "You'll see. I want to keep it a surprise." "Why?" "Because you have a habit of strong opinions. I don't want you to scare him off before he meets the family." I felt the old sting rise. The way she weaponized my emotions made my sincerity sound dangerous. "I'm your family, Lena." "Exactly," she said, voice cooling. "Let's not make this a thing. It's my day. Be happy for me." The line went dead before I could answer. I stared at the phone screen until my reflection stared back. I told myself she was being dramatic, not cruel. I told myself this was sisterhood, messy but repairable. 2 weeks later, I learned the wedding date through a cousin's post. "Can't wait for the Ashford wedding of the year." The caption glowed under fairy lights and champagne emojis. I called my mother. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Lena wanted to keep things intimate," she said carefully. "Intimate?" I laughed, sharp. "There are 100 people tagged in that photo." "It's complicated, sweetheart. You know how your sister gets when she's stressed." "When she's stressed, she erases me?" "Delara, please don't make this dramatic. It's not about you." There it was again, the family gospel. "It's not about you," as if my hurt were vanity, not injury. That night, Julian found me sitting on the couch, scrolling through the photos until my thumb went numb. He knelt beside me, his hand warm over mine. "Hey," he murmured, "don't let them get to you. You're better than that." I wanted to believe him. I wanted someone on my side. "She doesn't even want me there," I whispered. He sighed, pulling me close. Then don't go. You deserve peace, not pain. Forget the whole circus. He kissed the top of my head, and I closed my eyes against the comfort that felt almost strategic. I remember thinking how kind he was to hate my family for me, how loyal, how safe. The next morning, while he showered, I opened his laptop to check our budget spreadsheet. His calendar was still synced. I wasn't snooping. At least that's what I told myself. But there, under Saturday at 2 p.m., was an entry. St. Catherine's Ceremony. My stomach turned to stone. I clicked it open. Location, time, nothing else. No client name, no context. When he emerged, towel around his waist, I forced my voice to stay casual. Got another conference? Yeah, he said, smiling. Chicago this time. I'll be back Monday. I smiled too, matching his rhythm. Big account? The biggest. He leaned down and kissed me, water still tracing his jaw. You'll see, Del. It's going to change everything. He left a few hours later with his garment bag and that black suit I'd picked for his promotion. As the door clicked shut, the apartment felt hollow, like a body missing its heartbeat. I turned toward the window. Outside, the city looked washed in pale sun, ordinary. Somewhere across town, my sister was probably picking out flowers and photographers, rehearsing vows for a man none of us had seen. Except maybe I had. The thought came uninvited and refused to leave. It moved into the corners of the room, under the hum of the refrigerator, in the way the clock ticked 1 second too loud. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open, scrolling through her posts, the tagged venues, the hints and hashtags. And there it was, buried under a friend's story, a rehearsal dinner photo taken from behind. A man's silhouette in a dark suit, tall, familiar posture. The caption read, "She finally found her forever." My hands trembled as I zoomed in, pixel by pixel, until a faint glint appeared at the man's wrist, a black enamel cufflink inlaid with mother of pearl. The kind you can only find once. Morning came dressed like a dare. I woke before the sun, sheets twisted at my waist, the ceiling fan tracing its lazy circles as if it had all the time, and I had none. The city outside my window held its breath in that hour, when deliveries whisper and streetlights blink like tired eyes. I lay there, listening to the small domestic sounds, the refrigerator's throat clearing, a neighbor's faucet, and tried to decide whether the sensation in my chest was grief or premonition. It felt like both, braided tight. I made coffee I didn't drink. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and stared at the bed that still held the shape of last night, the hollow where Julian slept when he wasn't away. I could smell his aftershave in the fabric, and it made my hands ball into fists. The laptop sat on the desk like a witness. I opened his calendar again. The entry was still there, proof refusing to evaporate just because I begged it to. St. Catherine's Ceremony, 2 p.m. This is insane, I told the empty room, and the empty room did not argue. At 8:17 a.m., because I needed the kind of truth that comes from strangers, I called the Chicago hotel listed on the itinerary he'd left open yesterday like a breadcrumb. "Hi," I said in my professional nurse voice, the one that gets answers. "Could you connect me to Mr. Julian Thorne's room?" A beat, and then the clerk returned with a smile I could hear. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We don't have a guest by that name." "He might be under corporate," I pressed, flipping the page of a legal pad I hadn't realized I'd started filling with dates, times, a map of my own doubt. "We don't have anyone with that last name at the property," she repeated gently. "Perhaps a different location?" My thank you came out like a cough. When I hung up, the apartment seemed to tilt, as if we lived on a ship and the tide had made its choice. By 10:12, I was moving, not because the path felt righteous, but because standing still had become impossible. I showered and dressed in the black sheath that disappears in dim light. I folded a scarf over my hair the way my grandmother taught me on windy days, not to hide, but to hold myself together. In the mirror, my face looked like someone I might trust. Tired, yes, but steady. I tucked my phone into my clutch, the one with the tiny inner pocket where I keep a safety pin, a peppermint, and an old photograph of my mother laughing from a decade when she didn't know how to pose. On the way to St. Catherine's, I caught every red light like the city wanted me to reconsider. Radio off, I made a list out loud because lists are my life raft. Don't confront, Observe. Don't explode. Record. Don't let them write you. You write. The church rose out of the afternoon like a hymn someone had carved in stone. Familiar, expensive, chosen to be photographed. The parking lot glittered with rented cars and connections. A white van marked with the venue's logo idled by the side entrance, disgorging arrangements so lush even the air looked upholstered. Volunteers and staff moved like ants with clipboards. A woman at the front doors checked a list on a tablet and wore the kind of earpiece that suggests authority. I kept walking. The smaller side door to the sacristy was propped open with a wedge. Inside, the corridor smelled of wax and the tang of metal, and under it all the wet green whisper of flowers forced to bloom on command. I climbed the narrow staircase to the choir loft, my palms brushing a banister polished by a century of patient hands. A custodian passed me and didn't look twice. Black dress, scarf, a body performing the choreography of belonging. My heart knocked against my ribs, insistent but not frantic. I had been in rooms where the beep of a monitor meant life, and the flat line meant something else you couldn't unsee. Compared to that, this was theater, lavish, cruel, staged. From the loft, the nave unfolded like a throat. People found their pews in small dramas of seating and status. A toddler dropped a toy, and it rolled with the authority of a marble across marble. The string quartet plucked at the air. I pressed my hands to the rail and felt the wood warm slowly beneath my skin, as if it could be convinced I belonged to it. I watched my mother arrive in a navy dress the exact blue of forgiveness in a painting. My father upright in the dark suit he wears when he wants to be mistaken for a better man. They took their seats in the front, turning to greet friends with faces composed the way only practiced people can compose them. I tried to locate my childhood in those faces, and couldn't. Some people think betrayal is a spectacular event. Mostly it is a long rehearsal for a scene you didn't know had a script. And then the doors opened, and the light shifted, and the whole church inhaled together. Lena stood, framed by the day, every detail tuned to a pitch that photographs love. Her veil fell like something engineered by physics students to appear effortless. She shone the way a diamond shines, because pressure is the point. On her arm, back to me, shoulders I had smoothed jackets across, stood the groom. The details arrived like a litany I couldn't stop reciting. The slope of his neck where I'd rested my chin to reach a high shelf, the small crescent scar near his ear he joked made him look rakish, the cufflink, black enamel, mother of pearl, that flashed like a signal from a life in which I believed I could trust my eyes. He turned, and time did the thing it does when it becomes a stagehand, pulling the wrong rope, dropping the wrong curtain. Julian's profile, Julian's mouth, a familiar geometry of tenderness weaponized. Julian's eyes, scanning the room as if to collect proof that the story was working. I had imagined this moment would shatter me loudly. A glass dropped from a great height. Instead, the break was surgical, precise. My mind, that faithful archivist, laid out the evidence on an internal table. The Chicago hotel's polite negation, the calendar entry, the receipt dated a Saturday he swore he spent home, my mother's voice smoothing the edges of a request that had cut me. Lena's new word, private, polished and used like a key. My body wept without tears, a kind of cellular grieving that made the air feel granular. The minister's voice rose, rich as a baritone that had been waiting all day to be heard. Vows poured down the aisle like something sweet and sticky. I watched my parents absorb them like a lotion for spectators. I waited for the part where strangers are invited to tell the truth and calculated how the story would mutate the instant mine touched it. I could see the headlines of our family's private press release. Troubled sister crashes ceremony. I could see the comments. Jealousy, mental health, how sad. I could hear Lena's soft weapon voice. We did everything to protect her. I could hear Julian. This is heartbreaking. She needs help. Silence can be a weapon if you know how to sharpen it. I gripped the railing and did the thing I had never done in that house with the white tiles and the center of gravity named Lena. I refused to perform. I became, in that moment, not their liability, but my own witness. I do, he said, and the sound landed on my skin like grit. I do, she breathed, and the quartet swelled and someone sniffled with expensive sincerity. They kissed, and the room applauded, and the organ did its bright thunder, and I tasted iron. When they turned to face the congregation, his gaze lifted for a fraction, just a flick, and swept the balcony. It snagged on shadow and stilled. Maybe he felt me the way the body feels weather coming. Maybe he didn't. He blinked, and the mask reseated itself, the kind of fit that takes practice. The procession began. Flower girls cast petals in a stagger that would look charming in video. An uncle filmed with his phone high, producing memory in real time. I watched Lena's hand claim Julian's arm, the possessive press on tendon I recognized from mornings at our counter, and thought almost clinically, if love is a ledger, they have entered me as loss. I will show them my columns. When the last guest drifted toward the doors, I took a breath so deliberate it almost counted as an oath. I pulled my scarf closer and moved. The stair groaned softly under my weight, old wood confiding in me about all the feet it had steadied in moments when steadiness mattered. In the sacristy corridor, a florist argued in a whisper about peonies. A security guard laughed into his radio. Outside, the afternoon had sharpened, sun on stone, the sky washed clean to a brittle blue. The reception would be at the Grandview Estate, the kind of place that pronounces its own name and expects you to repeat it correctly. There would be gate guards with tablets and lists, a terrace with chandeliers hung from tent poles, a sweetheart table like a throne. There would be a speech from my father that made good on years of rehearsal, and a speech from Julian constructed of polished lies so beautiful they might pass for vows. There would be a bride glowing with stolen daylight. There would also be me. I crossed the parking lot to my car with the measured stride of a nurse leaving a room where the machines have been muted. I set my clutch on the passenger seat, smoothed my dress over my knees, and buckled my seatbelt with a click that sounded, today, like punctuation. In the mirror, my eyes were steady. My hands did not shake. Observe, record, preserve, I said to my reflection, a litany now. Don't give them your voice, give them the truth. I started the engine. The lily's sweetness had followed me into the car, clinging to the black fabric like a ghost. I rolled the window down and let the city in. Horns, laughter, a siren far, far away. Somewhere behind me, church bells began to ring. People say bells bless beginnings. Today they sounded like a verdict. I pulled out into traffic, several cars behind a white Bentley with ribbon on its hood and champagne in its future. I left the window open. I wanted the world. I wanted air. Most of all, I wanted the one thing they had already decided I would never have again. I wanted the story. The Grandview Estate announced itself like a boast. A mile of iron fence, banners in a serif font that sounded expensive, a driveway that curled through manicured gardens the way a snake curls around something sleeping. By the time I arrived, the sun had shifted to that flattering angle weddings pray for. The Bentley with the ribbon was waved through with a smile. I coasted past the main entrance and parked 2 blocks down beneath a row of ginkgo trees that shed their fan-shaped leaves like cheerful warnings. Security at the gate wore suits the color of authority and earpieces that made them tilt their heads as if listening to fate. Clipboards, tablets, names in neat columns. Family only. I tugged my scarf tighter, stepped off the road, and cut along the fence line where ivy performed abundance and hid the practical truth. Chain link beneath wrought iron, the world's favorite metaphor. The property backed onto a thin ribbon of woods. In scrub and shadow, I found a place where the fence dipped behind an ornamental hedge, and an old oak leaned like a conspirator. I tested the iron, found footholds, and climbed. My dress caught and tore with a sound like paper giving up. I swung a leg over, skin kissed by cold metal, and dropped into a thicket of boxwood. Leaves clung to me like applause that didn't mean it. From my hiding place, I could see the back terrace unfurl, a sweep of pale stone, a canopy of white tents swollen with chandeliers. Tables were set with linen that could have paid someone's rent, roses massed in bowls like soft artillery. The band on the far side teased jazz through the air, tidy and toothless, while waiters buttoned into crisp uniforms circulated with trays of champagne that remembered their bubbles. At the center, on a raised dais dressed in flowers and good intentions, sat the newlyweds. Lena draped herself over the moment like a woman born wearing it. Julian wore his tux like an alibi. Cameras hovered like bees, laughter lifted in rehearsed intervals. My parents occupied the front table like a crest on stationery, mother luminous in navy, father's hand a proprietary weight on the back of her chair. Every detail declared that the story had been written by people who understood how stories look in pictures. Closer to the hedge, two society women with pearls that could have been security devices smoked the kind of cigarettes that pretend to be elegant. Gorgeous, one said, exhaling a soft fog. Did you hear about the sister? The other asked, as if sharing a secret recipe. Unstable, apparently. They had to keep her away. The word reached me and settled on my skin like ash. Unstable. Not betrayed, not erased. Unstable. The adjective people use when a woman knows the truth too early. I moved along the edge of the garden, keeping the fountain between me and the crowd. Water flickered over stone nymphs whose eyes had no patience for human vows. My phone, already on silent, warmed in my hand. I moved closer, past a hedge shaped into a peacock with an expression I recognized from family portraits. On the dais, Lena threw back her head and laughed. Julian leaned in to say something into her ear, private words not meant for witnesses. I recognized the tilt of his voice by the way her shoulders softened to accept it. His hand rested high on her thigh as if the intimacy might stabilize a narrative. For a split second, my stomach lifted, an elevator with cut cables. I pressed my palm to my mouth and breathed through it. Beautiful ceremony, wasn't it? A new voice, male, nearby. I froze behind the stone urn of hydrangeas. Perfect, a woman answered. Though the family drama... You mean the sister? He said, relish in the dip of his tone. I heard she's difficult. The way people say mold, I dug my nails into my palm until the need to scream turned into something more useful, a decision. Observe, record, preserve. I slid my phone to camera and began to collect. Lena's left hand flashing the diamond Julian did not buy alone. Julian's mouth shaping gratitude as he stood and tapped his glass, my parents lifting their flutes in synchronized blessing, the shot of their fingers brushing where two lives pretend to become one. The world loves evidence. It just needs someone to arrange it. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian began, warm with practiced sincerity, thank you for honoring our privacy these last months. He paused just long enough to make privacy sound like a virtue instead of a weapon. When I met Lena, I knew... He found her eyes and let the sentence trail into that smile I had once mistaken for truth. That my life had been waiting for her. Applause, the soft rustle of napkins dabbed to lips to hide envy dressed as joy. And now, Lena said, standing, voice pitched to Carrie, how many stages had she trained on without calling them stages? I want to thank everyone who respected that sometimes love needs protection. You were there for us, even when some people didn't understand. Her gaze roamed the terrace, casual, grazing right over my hedge. Not looking for me, exactly. Looking for the story to be agreed upon. I took another step, and branches scraped my calf. A security guard at the edge of the lawn glanced over, brow pulling down. I stayed behind the fountain while he murmured into his radio. When he moved away again, I stepped from the shadow as if I belonged to the light and walked into the party. No one looks for a ghost under chandeliers. Up close, the spectacle was obscene and precise. Ribbons matched lips, matched floral runners. A tower of macarons glowed like a pastel skyline. I slipped between tables, a black seam in a white dress code, and felt the way sound changes when people are deciding whether they recognize you. A woman in a fascinator glanced, frowned, and turned away, trained by money to reject disruptions. A waiter met my eyes for the length of one breath, curiosity, sympathy, a warning, and kept moving. I reached the edge of the dais just as Julian finished his speech, and Lena tucked herself into the aperture of his arm. Excuse me, ma'am. A hand at my elbow, firm but rehearsed. Security. May I see your invitation? I turned and met his eyes. I am the invitation, I said quietly. I'm family. His radio chirped. East Garden, a voice cracked softly. Possible issue. The guard's grip tightened, then loosened as he recalibrated. Don't manhandle, this is a tasteful crime scene. Please wait here, he said, stepping into my path. Behind him, I watched my mother look up, her mouth forming the shape of a prayer and a warning at once. My father followed her gaze, his face setting like concrete poured into a mold he had mixed himself. They moved fast. First my mother, fingers pressed to pearls, then my father stoic as a verdict, and finally Lena with the choreography of a woman trained to turn disasters into great lighting. Julian came last, and I watched the flicker across his face. A brief, true fear, then nothing. The mask slid on as if it were skin. "Delara," my mother hissed in a whisper so bright it could be photographed. "What are you doing here?" She reached for my wrist with the same hand that had once wiped ice cream off my chin. "Congratulating my sister," I said. My voice surprised me, even, edged, almost kind. I looked over her shoulder to the dais. "And her husband." My father stepped in. "You need to leave, now." His tone was a childhood cue. "Go to your room. Stop showing your feelings." Lena folded herself between us like silk falling just right. "Please don't do this," she said, voice pitched for the nearby phones. "Not today." She turned her face 3 degrees left, her good side. "You can be intense. Let's talk tomorrow." The air around us grew taut, sound bending toward us as people stilled without appearing to. I felt the audience join the scene like oxygen fueling a controlled burn. I moved my gaze to Julian. "Say something," I told him very quietly. "Say anything real." His eyes, that warm brown I once believed could only hold gentleness, flicked to the security guard, then to the phones, then back to me. Calculation made a sound I will always hear. "Del," he said, using my private name like a lint roller, "you're upset. Let's go somewhere private and—" "Private?" I repeated, and the word curdled. "Like the private wedding where you married my sister while you were married to me?" A collective intake of breath knocked the tent. Someone dropped a fork. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's jaw clenched hard enough to crack a tooth. Lena's eyes widened, just for a heartbeat, before she recovered with the skill of a woman who has rehearsed apologies in advance. "She's unwell," she said to the nearest table, to the air, to the story. "We tried to protect her." I slid my phone out and lifted the wedding photo from our courthouse day, the one where Julian's smile split his face like a sunrise. "Photoshop is very convincing," Lena said immediately, brittle sweet. "She's been fixated. We didn't want this." Julian's voice softened into the register you use for a child or a jury. "Delara, please, this isn't—" "Real?" I asked. "Say it. Say I'm not your wife." He looked at the crowd and saw his own reflection and fashioned a man who could be applauded. "I'm sorry you're hurting," he said, "but you need help." A murmur like bees. The security guard stepped closer, hand hovering near my elbow again, manners polished to a sheen. I kept my eyes on Julian. "I loved you," I said, not loudly, not for effect. "I loved you so much." Something in his expression shifted. Annoyance at a rehearsal interrupted, not remorse. "I'm sorry you feel that way." The guard touched my arm. "Ma'am." I let him, not because I was done, but because I was choosing how not to be finished. My mother's whisper chased me. "Please, honey, don't." I turned once, taking in all of them in a single frame. My father's sternness, my mother's glossy grief, Lena's beauty weaponized, Julian's virtue tailored to fit. Behind them, guests raised glasses like shields, phones like proof, pity like a blanket to throw over the truth and smother it into a polite shape. As the guard guided me through the hedges toward a service gate, laughter stitched itself back together behind us with neat, small sounds. The band swelled obediently. The tent sighed as if relieved it had survived a gale. Past the fountain, I looked back just once. On the dais, Lena was already standing, arms out, smoothing the atmosphere. "So sorry for the disruption," she sang into the microphone. "Let's celebrate love." The crowd applauded, grateful to be told what to feel. At the gate, the guard released my arm, hesitant. "You okay?" he asked, not unkindly. I almost laughed. "I will be," I said. "You just escorted the least dangerous person here." He opened the gate, and I stepped onto the quiet road where the ginkgo leaves lay like little golden hands. In the distance, the music resumed its expensive smile. The wind lifted my scarf and kissed the sweat on my neck with cool fingers. I stood for a moment in the noise of my own blood and let the humiliation settle into something with bone. "They think I'm crazy? Let them." I checked into the kind of motel that looks like it's been apologizing since the 80s. Shag carpet the color of old avocados, a soda machine that coughed up flat optimism, a front desk clerk who slid me a key without asking for a name I was willing to give. "Parking in the back," he said, not looking up, which felt like mercy. Room 217 smelled faintly of bleach and something sweeter that couldn't quite hide. I locked the door, slid the chain, drew the curtains, and sat on the bedspread as if it might have instructions printed on it. The silence came down like weather. There are cries you learn as a nurse and cries you don't. In the hospital, grief has a hallway, a rhythm, a protocol. In this room, it had an animal shape. I folded forward and let it wreck me. I cried for the girl who had spent years learning to be small enough to fit in other people's frames, for the woman who mistook management for love, for the sister who had believed private could mean protection and not disappearance. When the salt burned my lips and I had nothing left, I lay still and watched the ceiling fan trace its loops like a tired metronome. Outside, trucks downshifted on the freeway, and someone in the next room laughed at something canned. When the sobbing stopped, the shaking began. I went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face until my skin stung and the mirror wavered. It showed me a person I recognized and didn't. Eyes ringed in red, hair escaped from its scarf, mouth set with something I had never allowed it. Resolve without permission. I slid my wedding ring off, watched it sit in my palm like a small, bright lie, and tucked it into the motel's Gideon Bible, because symbolism felt too on the nose and therefore perfect. I tried to sleep and failed. The mind, when it has been humiliated, flings its own evidence like a prosecutor in a bad suit. The cufflink, the calendar, the way he'd said privacy, like a sacrament, the way my mother's face had managed both joy and warning at once, the way Lena had angled her jaw for the nearest camera even as she called me unwell. Shame is an excellent anesthetic. It numbs you until the cut is clean. When it wore off, the wound was precise and deep. I stared at the popcorn ceiling until it looked like a map and chose a direction. By dawn, the grief had cooled into something with edges. I showered in a stream of water that alternated between scald and indifference. I put on yesterday's dress because it was already ruined. I wrote 3 words on a torn scrap of motel stationery and tucked it into my clutch like a charm against cowardice. Observe, record, preserve. The apartment felt like someone had tidied a crime scene. I stood just inside the door and listened. No hum of his electric toothbrush, no podcast bleeding from the bathroom speaker, no jacket tossed over the chair with the laziness of belonging. His coffee mug sat in the sink with a ring of cinnamon at the bottom, like tree rings marking a life I would not count anymore. I walked from room to room, not touching anything at first, the way you do when you return to a place you used to own and realize you only rented it with your body. His office had always been a shrine to order, the desk squared to the window, the ficus he watered with the loyalty he owed people, the books arranged in lines that felt militarily precise. A file cabinet by the bookshelf was locked, which would have mattered more if I didn't already know the key lived where secrets go to preen. Inside the hollowed-out copy of a business classic whose title was either a threat or a confession. I tipped the book and felt the thin jangle. The key fell into my palm like a coin finally returned. Inside the cabinet, paper had been disciplined into categories with tabs that looked harmless until you read the names. Statements for an account I didn't recognize. Opened 7 months ago. Withdrawals large enough to buy silence. Receipts from restaurants with white tablecloths and a jewelry store. I walked past on my way to the train. The one where the lights inside make every stone look like it's telling the truth. Hotel bills that laid out a cartography of deception, and behind a manila folder labeled quarterlies, a small cardboard box with tape that invited fingernails to pry. I opened it and found the device that has ruined more hearts than swords, a cheap black phone no one is supposed to admit exists. It was dead, of course. For a moment I thought this would be the joke that saved him, all this and no charger. But the second drawer of his desk yielded a tangle of cords, one of which fit. I plugged it in, waited on the edge of his chair as if a doctor would emerge and say, "We can fix this." The screen shuddered, lit, blinked a date that looked like yesterday, even if it belonged to months of before. No password, Of course not. Secrets don't need complicated locks when you are certain you've trained everyone to look away. The message thread at the top wore my sister's name. I stared at it until the letters unhooked from meaning and then hooked back in, twice as sharp. I tapped. The first messages were the kind you think only live in cheap dramas, until you recall that life studies television, not the other way around. Can't stop thinking about last night. You smell like rain and danger. Soon, I promise. Then the logistics, the choreography of betrayal. She's on nights. You can come by after 9. Use the back stairs. I told her I'm at the gym. I scrolled, cold, methodical, screenshots stacked like x-rays. The romance rotted where it always does, into strategy. 7 months ago. Your parents are suspicious, Julian wrote. Your mom saw us at the restaurant. She won't tell, Lena replied. She said I deserve to be happy. 6 months ago. We have to keep her away from the wedding, Lena wrote. He can't know until after. He won't, Julian answered. She trusts me completely. It's almost sad. 4 months ago. What about the money? Lena. Handled, Julian. We'll call it a business retreat. Use her account too, Lena wrote. She never checks. 3 months ago. Your mother asked if I think Dell is okay, Julian wrote. I said she's fragile. That helps. Good, Lena replied. We're setting the ground for the narrative. I stopped to breathe. The room seemed to contract, like the air had heard enough and wanted to be elsewhere. I took photos with my own phone of every screen, every date stamp. I forwarded the images to a cloud account he didn't know about, named the folder something bland, tax receipts 2021, and felt for the first time in 2 days a line inside me unspool into something resembling control. Further down, the officiant is set, Lena wrote 2 weeks before the ceremony. You sure about him? Julian. He's an actor, she replied. No paper trail. It keeps us safe if... anything. If what? If she makes trouble. And this, from the night before the wedding, your father says they'll keep her away. Small venue. Family only. She is family, Julian wrote. A pause, and then Lena. Not the kind that matters. I went still, my hands numb. In the hospital, when a monitored line jumps in a pattern you recognize as lethal, there's a moment of chill clarity before protocol kicks in. This felt like that and something worse. Not a sudden arrhythmia, but a condition chronic and named. I scrolled further because pain, like curiosity, wants completion. During the reception, the same hour I stood behind a fountain and listened to strangers perform my obituary, texts pinged like clinking glasses. She showed up, Lena wrote. Of course she did. Handle it, Julian. We did. She tried to show a photo. We called it Photoshop. Good. Stick to the narrative. People believe what looks better on them, Lena wrote. Pity flatters. I closed my eyes because the room had started to rotate, and I didn't want to throw up on the carpet of a man who was no longer my husband. When I opened them, I kept going, not out of masochism, but because diligence is the only prayer I was capable of. I found bank transfers from our joint account labeled innocuous things, vendor fee, event deposit, and remembered the mornings I'd left for early rounds while he slept late, the way his hand reached instinctively for my side of the bed as if he loved the space my absence made. I photographed it all. The messages, the receipts, the neat graphs of withdrawal, the burner's call log showing numbers saved as innocuous names, florist that was actually my mother, planner that was my father. I felt something in me sharpen into a tool. Then, near the bottom of the thread, a small exchange that bristled with a different electricity. What are we going to do about the marriage? Julian wrote. Legally, I'm still tied to her. Relax, Lena replied. The ceremony isn't binding. We used an actor. I protected us. A beat, then. You planned that without telling me? I planned for us, she wrote. You're welcome. I sat back. Somewhere beyond our windows, a siren dopplered across an afternoon that had gotten old. The ficus in the corner leaned toward a light it couldn't reach. I thought about Lena at 20, practicing sincerity in a dorm mirror, about my mother teaching us both how to smile for photographs with our teeth, but not our eyes, about my father's always just so tie and the way he straightened it even when confronted with disaster, as if the knot could fix the narrative. My phone buzzed on the desk and I jumped. A text from an unknown number arrived like a stone pitched at glass. You need to stop. This will only hurt you. No name. No punctuation except the period that always feels like a threat. Another followed. Family is complicated, Delara. Let it go. The message bubble hung, a third dot blipping. Then nothing. I stared until the screen dimmed and a version of me looked back, strange and steady. I set both phones on the desk and laid the documents out like a ritual. Receipts, transfers, screenshots in neat rows. The evidence looked boring. That was its power. Spectacle dazzles, paperwork berries. I thought of the lilies in the church, thick and sweet and rotting just out of sight, and realized paperwork is the scent you notice when the flowers are a lie. I gathered everything and slid it into a tote I used for night shifts, a bag trained to carry emergencies. At the door, I paused and looked back at the room where I had once learned the geography of a marriage, the dent in the couch, the book he pretended to read, the lamp we never replaced because the light was kinder when it flickered. It would be tempting to set fire to all of it, to watch things perform the honesty of flame, but I needed an honesty that signed its name. In the hallway, I felt 10 pounds heavier and 5 pounds less likely to break. My hands were steady. My ring finger felt naked and right. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and when the doors slid open, the mirrored walls held the outline of a woman I would not have recognized a week ago. Still, yes, but no longer compliant. On the street, the afternoon had rearranged itself into something ordinary. People argued softly about whose turn it was to get takeout. A kid on a scooter counted cracks in the sidewalk. A dog pulled its owner toward a scent only the dog understood. The world did not care about my revelation. That felt like freedom, not insult. In my pocket, the motel key warmed against my palm. I held it for a second and then dropped it into a trash can by the curb. I didn't need a room to hide in anymore. I had a plan. They thought I would leave quietly, or implode publicly, or dissolve into the diagnosis they had prepared. They had rehearsed a story in which I was the problem and they were the solution. It had taken me a day to bleed, a night to shake, and an hour to remember the skill set my life had always been waiting for me to use. Count carefully, chart accurately, sign clearly, and don't be late. I touched the tote where the evidence lay humming with its new weight and felt a stillness that registered as safety. Not because I was protected, because I was awake. They planned everything. Morning peeled itself open in shades of gray. The city was indifferent to my revelations. Buses still hissed down the avenue, coffee carts perfumed the air, and the same woman with the red umbrella passed my corner at exactly 7:43. I watched her from the cafe across from Catherine Vale and Associates. The sign on the glass was etched in gold, letters so sharp they could have cut the skin. Catherine Vale was the kind of woman you hired when you wanted the storm on your side. Her reputation traveled through hospitals and courthouses like rumor, precise, relentless, allergic to pity. I stepped inside. The air smelled of paper and victory. Reception took my name and led me down a hallway paneled in pale wood. Catherine was already standing, hand extended, eyes scanning like a scanner in a lab. "Delara Ashford," she said. "Sit. Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out." Her office was clean geometry, glass, chrome, a single fern pretending softness. When she spoke, it was in full sentences that landed like verdicts. I told her everything. Not the sanitized version, the whole feral, embarrassing truth. The church, the reception, the phone. My family's complicity spelled out in text bubbles. The night in the motel when I stopped being afraid of being unlikable. She didn't interrupt. She took notes with a fountain pen that looked like it might file lawsuits on its own. When I finished, she leaned back, her expression unreadable. "What you have," she said finally, "is gold, adultery, fraud, conspiracy, misappropriation of marital funds, possibly bigamy if we can prove intent." She stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the street as if she could already see Julian there, small as a clause in a contract. "Do you want revenge or justice?" she asked. "Both," I said, "but in the right order." That earned the smallest curl of her mouth. "Then we'll start with the law. Revenge can take care of itself later." She turned back, eyes bright and merciless. "Here's what we're going to do. I listened as she outlined it. Divorce petition citing adultery and fraud, with all the evidence attached. Photos, messages, bank records, the fake officiant. Make it public record. Financial claim for a misappropriation. Every hotel bill, every dinner, every flower paid from our joint account would be cataloged as theft. Cease and desist letters to Lena and my parents, naming them as co-conspirators in emotional and reputational harm. Media control. A journalist friend would leak the filings the moment they hit the court docket, before my family could spin the narrative. Do you understand? She asked. Yes, I said. My voice was steadier than my pulse. Good. You'll need to be brave. They'll call you unstable. They'll weaponize your empathy. Don't respond. Let me speak for you until it's time to speak for yourself. She handed me a pen. Sign here. The tip of the pen bit through the paper. My name, Delara Ashford Thorne, looked foreign, a version of me already halfway into the past. 3 days later, Catherine's courier dropped the divorce packet at Lena's apartment. I didn't go. Catherine's investigator, Rita, went instead, a grandmotherly woman with eyes like a hawk and a hidden camera in her brooch. That evening, I sat in Catherine's office again, watching the footage on her laptop. The door opened. Julian answered, hair tousled, t-shirt creased. He smiled the smile that had once been home. Rita offered the envelope. Delivery for Mr. Thorne. He signed without looking. The moment his thumb touched the pen, my marriage ended in everything but paperwork. He opened it. Read. The color drained from his face as if someone had unplugged him. What the hell? He whispered. Lena appeared behind him wearing one of his shirts. She looked like she hadn't slept, or hadn't cared to. What is it? She asked. Julian handed her the papers. She scanned, froze. Her eyes darted to the camera she couldn't see. She can't do this, she hissed. She can, Julian said hollowly. She has everything. The texts, the transfers, the burner phone. How? He rubbed his face. I don't know. I thought I locked everything. Lena paced. This is bad. If this goes public... It already is, his voice broke on the second word. Then came the line that burned itself into me. You knew our marriage wasn't legal. Lena flinched. I was protecting us. The officiant was an actor. It's just an affair, not a crime. You planned that, Julian said, without telling me. You're welcome, she snapped, then realized how it sounded. I mean, Julian, think. But he wasn't thinking anymore. He was drowning. I watched him through the grainy footage and felt something close to satisfaction, though it tasted like metal. Catherine paused the video. Well, she said, they've saved us months of argument. By the next morning, the filings were online. A headline on a local legal blog. Nurse files explosive divorce suit against financial consultant and sister. Within hours, it spread. My phone buzzed like a swarm. I ignored it. Catherine called at noon. They've hired counsel. Expect a countersuit claiming emotional instability and privacy invasion. Of course they did. They'll lose, but prepare for noise. That afternoon, I got the first call from my mother. I didn't answer. The voicemail was frantic. Delara, what have you done? These letters, these accusations, it's not what you think. Call us back before you destroy what's left of this family. I listened twice, then deleted it. At sunset, a second message came from my father, his voice calm in the way only the guilty achieve. We're disappointed, Delara. Airing private matters publicly is beneath you. Be reasonable. Reasonable. The word I'd lived under like a ceiling. I turned the phone off. 2 days later, Catherine summoned me to her office. He blinked, she said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside, Julian's countersuit, already crumbling. His lawyer claims you stole the burner phone. We've responded that you discovered it in your shared home. The judge sided with us. What happens now? We proceed to asset division. She smiled, predatory. They'll have to show where every dollar went. Outside the window, the city looked the same. Glass, smoke, people late for work. But I felt the axis shift. For the first time since the wedding, my story was being told in my voice, in my handwriting, backed by evidence instead of emotion. That night, I walked through my apartment and noticed the quiet no longer hummed with panic. The plants needed watering. I watered them. I made tea. I sat at my desk and began to write. Not a statement for court, but something I needed for myself. Day 1 of war, I wrote at the top. Objective, survival with dignity. I listed the facts, then the names, then what each had taken. The list turned into a map of everything I would reclaim. When the cease and desist letters landed, the family chat exploded. A cousin texted screenshots before my parents could delete anything. Mom, How could she? Dad, ignore it. She wants attention. Lena, she has the phone. Julian, did you delete the cloud? Julian, working on it. Too late. Cousin Mira, you all knew? After that, silence. The next day, Catherine forwarded me an email from a journalist friend. Do you want to go on record? I declined. The evidence would speak for me. But word travels faster than caution. Within a week, the gossip blogs had the story. Names redacted, but obvious. Comments flooded in. People loved a scandal dressed as a morality tale. The betrayed sister, the golden girl who stole her sister's husband, the parents who chose the wrong child. At first, I hated every word. Then I realized something. For the first time, the narrative wasn't being controlled by them. Late one evening, I sat on the floor, surrounded by papers, and thought of the church again. The lilies, the music, the moment my world split open. I imagined walking back into that place, not as a ghost in black, but as someone who had survived the fire and learned how to wield it. I opened my notebook and wrote a single line under the day's entry. They built a story to erase me. Now I'll write the sequel. I closed the book, turned off the light, and let the dark settle around me, not as punishment, but as ink waiting for a new chapter. This time I write the story. The courthouse smelled of old paper and disinfectant, that peculiar mix of bureaucracy and consequence. I'd been there before, years ago, sitting beside anxious parents waiting for custody hearings or medical testimony, but this time the air tasted different. This time the case was mine. Room 312B wasn't grand. No sweeping staircase or mahogany panels, just a raised bench, rows of wooden seats polished by generations of regret, and a clock that ticked loud enough to be cruel. Catherine sat beside me, perfectly still, her briefcase a weapon disguised as leather. Remember, she whispered, you've already won. Today is about letting them realize it. Julian entered first, flanked by his lawyer, a man who dressed like money laundering had a fashion line. Julian's hair was too neat, his tie too symmetrical, his eyes darting to mine and away. Behind him came Lena, all ivory blouse and calculated tremor. My parents followed, faces drawn into masks of dignified exhaustion, the kind that says, we raised her better than this. The judge, a woman with steel gray hair and the patience of a saint, adjusted her glasses. We're here for the matter of Thorne versus Thorne, she said. Proceed. Catherine stood, her voice measured and melodic. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Delara Ashford Thorne, seeks dissolution of marriage on grounds of fraud, adultery, and financial misconduct. She will also present evidence of coordinated deception by the respondents, Lena Ashford and the Ashford parents. Julian's lawyer rose next, oily confidence coating every syllable. Your Honor, we maintain that Mrs. Thorne is experiencing an emotional crisis and has misconstrued certain family matters. There was no fraud, no criminal intent, merely misunderstanding and grief. The judge's gaze slid to me. Mrs. Thorne, you have evidence? Catherine nodded toward me. She does, Your Honor. Compelling evidence. I stood. My hands didn't shake. Catherine opened the folder and handed me the burner phone like a relic from a fallen empire. I placed it on the evidence table. The bailiff carried it to the bench. Catherine clicked her remote and the monitor behind the judge lit up. The messages filled the screen. Time-stamped, clear, damning. She's fragile. That helps. We'll keep her away. The officiant was an actor. It keeps us safe. The courtroom murmured, a low tidal hum. The judge held up a hand. Silence. Catherine continued, Your Honor, we also have bank statements, signed by both Mr. Thorne and Ms. Ashford, showing joint funds used for wedding expenses and personal luxury purchases unrelated to marital property. Julian's lawyer interjected, Your Honor, these could have been fabricated. The judge's eyebrow lifted. Are you suggesting opposing counsel forged bank records? Simply noting possibilities, he said, but his tone cracked halfway through the sentence. Catherine clicked to the next slide, a photo of Julian and Lena, time-stamped, taken by the hotel security camera, his hand on her waist, her mouth near his ear. A moment too intimate to misinterpret. Julian's head dropped. Lena's face went pale, but her mouth tightened. This is harassment, she whispered to her lawyer. Catherine ignored her. Your Honor, you'll also see evidence of deliberate reputational harm, statements coordinated among family members labeling my client unstable to preemptively discredit her should the affair be exposed. Messages between Ms. Ashford and Mrs. Ashford detail that plan. The judge adjusted her glasses again, scanning the text on screen. We have to keep her away. She's dramatic. People will believe that. The silence that followed was thick enough to stand in. My parents stared at the floor. My father's jaw ticked. My mother's hands twisted in her lap. Do you wish to respond? The judge asked. Julian's lawyer whispered something urgent, but Julian raised a hand. No, he said. His voice broke the stillness. There's nothing to defend. Lena whipped her head toward him. What are you doing? She hissed. He looked at her with something like despair, or maybe the first honest emotion he'd had in months. You lied to me too, he said. You said the marriage wouldn't count, that it would all go away. The judge leaned forward. Are you admitting to the relationship and the deception, Mr. Thorne? Julian's shoulders sagged. Yes, Your Honor. Catherine's eyes flicked toward me. No triumph, just confirmation. Then we request summary judgment in favor of Mrs. Thorne. Full dissolution, sole retention of assets, and punitive damages for fraud and emotional distress. The judge nodded slowly. Motion granted. The court finds sufficient evidence of deceit and misappropriation. Mr. Thorne, you will surrender all shared assets to the petitioner and cooperate with any ongoing investigation into financial misconduct. Ms. Ashford, you may face separate charges for conspiracy and defamation, pending review. Lena's breath caught, sharp and shallow. This isn't fair, she stammered. She ruined everything. I turned to her, calm as glass. No, I said. You did. I just stopped covering for you. Her eyes filled with tears that didn't quite fall. You're going to destroy this family. It was already destroyed, I said. You just made it look beautiful while it burned. The bailiff called for order as whispers rippled through the courtroom. My mother started crying softly. My father looked old for the first time in my life. When the judge's gavel fell, it didn't sound like punishment. It sounded like punctuation. Outside, the air hit like clean water. Reporters hovered at the steps, microphones ready. Catherine guided me past them, one hand on my shoulder. Say nothing, she murmured. Let silence be your headline. But I paused halfway down the stairs and turned to the cameras. Not to speak, but to look. The flashbulbs burst like fireworks, reflecting in my eyes. I wanted them to see what survival looked like when it finally stopped apologizing. Julian came out moments later, shoulders hunched. Reporters shouted his name. He didn't answer. Lena followed, face buried in her hands, her mother beside her, trying to guide her toward the car. My parents didn't look at me. They moved like ghosts who had been seen too clearly. Catherine drove me home. We didn't talk. The city slid by. Billboards, buses, people arguing at crosswalks, all perfectly ordinary. I loved that ordinariness more than I ever had. It meant the world went on without their permission. At home, I took off my shoes, poured myself a glass of water, and stood at the window. The light outside was soft, that moment between evening and forgiveness. I thought of the church again, the lilies, the vows, the betrayal, and smiled at the irony that truth, like faith, often starts in ruins. I unpacked the tote bag that had carried my evidence, one piece at a time. The phone, the statements, the photographs, artifacts of war. I placed them in a box and labeled it in neat block letters, proof. Then I sealed it with tape and slid it into the back of the closet. On my dresser sat my old nursing badge, the one I'd stopped wearing after the scandal began. I picked it up, brushed the dust from its surface, and pinned it to my jacket. Tomorrow I'd go back to the hospital. There were lives to tend to that had nothing to do with deceit. Before bed, I opened my journal one last time. The pages were filled now. Dates, quotes, fragments of rage and clarity. I turned to the last blank page and wrote slowly. They took my silence. I took everything else. I closed the book and set it beside the window, where the first stars were threading through the dark. The city hummed like a distant heartbeat. Somewhere, Lena would be learning how it feels to lose an audience. Somewhere, Julian would be counting his consequences. And somewhere inside me, something steady and bright had finally begun to grow. Not vengeance, not even justice. The days after the verdict felt weightless. The kind of quiet that comes not from peace, but from the exhaustion of surviving something designed to undo you. I slept for nearly a whole weekend. No alarms, no panic jolting me awake. When I opened my eyes Monday morning, the light through my window looked different. Softer, maybe. Or maybe I was just finally looking at it, not through it. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I could feel it in my bones. the way grief leaves tiny rearrangements behind. My apartment no longer felt like a tomb of betrayal. It felt like a room where air could move again. I stripped the sheets, threw out the remnants of the life Julian left behind, the cologne bottle, the half-empty whiskey, the cufflinks he'd once worn to our anniversary dinner. They hit the bottom of the trash bag with a small, clean sound. It wasn't triumph, it was space. Catherine had called the night before. "They won't appeal," she said simply. "He's too broke, she's too humiliated, and your parents have withdrawn their support. You're free, Delara." Free. I rolled that word on my tongue like something I'd never quite learned how to pronounce. 2 weeks later, I returned to the hospital. The first time I stepped back into the neonatal ward, the familiar antiseptic scent hit me like memory itself. A nurse waved. Someone called my name. The rhythm of beeping monitors and soft lullabies stitched me back into a world that still needed me. Babies don't care about gossip blogs or divorce settlements. They only care that you're there, steady and warm. A resident named Priya hugged me in the break room. "We missed you," she said. "You look lighter." "Maybe I finally put something down," I answered. She smiled. "Whatever it is, keep it that way." For the first time in months, I laughed and meant it. Evenings were quieter. I cooked again, small meals that didn't need to impress anyone. Soup, roasted vegetables, tea with honey. I didn't check my phone obsessively. The silence was mine now, not a punishment. Every few nights, I opened the box labeled "proof" in my closet and reminded myself it was real, that I hadn't imagined any of it. Then I'd close it again, because sometimes the proof you need most is not of what happened, but that it ended. I started walking after work. Long, aimless walks that took me through parts of the city I'd ignored for years. One Friday, I found myself standing across from St. Catherine's, the church where it had all shattered. The sun was low, washing the stone walls gold. The gates were open. I hesitated, then I went in. The pews were empty except for a woman lighting a candle at the altar. The same lilies that once filled the air with deceit had been replaced by daisies and chrysanthemums, humble, honest flowers that didn't pretend to be perfect. I sat in the back row and listened to the stillness. The silence that day didn't lie. It listened. For a long moment, I didn't think about Julian or Lena or my parents. I thought about the version of myself who had sat up there in the choir loft, watching her life crumble in slow motion. I wanted to tell her she would survive, but maybe she already knew. She'd stayed silent, not because she was weak, but because sometimes silence is the only way to hear what you need to do next. I lit a candle for her, my past self, and whispered, "We made it." The flame trembled, then steadied. I didn't expect the letter that arrived a week later. No return address, just my name written in my father's blocky handwriting. Inside, 2 pages, his and my mother's. No apologies, not exactly, just explanations wrapped in nostalgia. "We thought we were protecting your sister. We didn't realize how far it had gone. We were wrong." There was a check inside. I left it on the counter. Forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't something you mail. Spring arrived slowly, the kind of spring that doesn't burst into color, but stretches open one petal at a time. I joined an art class again, sketching cityscapes with charcoal, the same way I used to before medicine swallowed my time. The instructor, a man in his 40s with paint under his nails, walked past one afternoon and said, "You draw like someone rebuilding." "Maybe I am," I said. He nodded, not prying. His name was Eli. We started talking after class, about everything but the past. His laughter was gentle, unhurried. When he told me he used to work in construction before switching to art therapy, I almost smiled at the symmetry. Both of us had learned how to rebuild things, just with different tools. One night he asked, "Do you ever go back to where it started? To remember?" "Not to remember," I said, "to make sure it's really over." He didn't ask for details. That was the kindest thing about him. By early summer, the gossip had faded. The internet had found new scandals to chew on. My family name no longer trended for the wrong reasons. Catherine called again, this time to close the case officially. "You did it," she said. "Most people crumble. You built something." "Thank you," I told her, "for teaching me that silence can win too." She laughed softly. "No, Delara, silence survives, truth wins." After we hung up, I stood by the window, watching the sunset paint the city in colors that belonged to no one. I thought of the first day I'd stepped into her office, broken and shaking. I thought of the church, the court, the box of proof. And then I thought of what came after, all the space I'd fought for just to breathe. That night, I opened my journal again, the last page of the last chapter. I wrote slowly, each word deliberate. The truth didn't set me free. I did. I closed it, placed it next to the candle on my nightstand, and turned off the light. The city murmured outside like a living thing. I lay there, breathing in the quiet. Somewhere far away, people were still talking about the woman who crashed her sister's wedding and took back her life. Let them. Stories evolve. Mine wasn't tragedy anymore. It was testimony. In the dark, I smiled to myself. The kind of smile that doesn't need witnesses. 5 summers have burned and softened the city since the day a gavel turned my life into a clean line. Time did not arrive as trumpets or fireworks. It came as small, almost impolite kindnesses. The kettle's first hiss in the morning, the dog's collar jingling like punctuation in a quiet paragraph, my own breath not bracing for impact. I live in a narrow house now, the kind with a crooked smile of a porch and a garden that insists on forgiving neglect. When I pull the gate closed at night, the latch clicks like a promise I wrote for myself and finally signed. The box labeled Proof sits high on a closet shelf, a relic of a language I no longer speak. Sometimes when I change out winter clothes for spring, I touch the cardboard to be polite to the person it saved. I don't open it. Evidence has a smell, old paper and heat, that lingers in your hair. I've had enough of that perfume. Eli came over a year after the verdict, carrying a loaf of bread he baked too long and a dozen peonies he swore the florist tricked him into buying. He has paint on his knuckles and a patience that isn't performance. We never made a speech about beginning. One day he left a sweater on the back of a chair and didn't remember to take it home. A week later, he installed bookshelves and pretended he was measuring the wall when he was really measuring how much of him the room could hold. He isn't the answer to a wound. He is a man who knows where the light switches are and turns them on without asking if I'm ready to see. The hospital promoted me last year, pediatric unit lead with a focus on caregiver trauma. I sit on small chairs with exhausted parents and teach them the rituals that saved me. How to refuse the story that hurts you, how to write down the names of things that matter, how to say no, like a nurse says stat, efficiently, without apology. I still work night shifts sometimes, not because I need the money, but because I love the way the building breathes at 3 a.m., like the whole world is finally telling the truth. People still ask about the scandal occasionally, the way you ask about whether you remember because it rained on a holiday. Are you the sister? They venture, embarrassment ready like an umbrella. I smile when I have the energy and say, I'm the nurse. Most days that's enough. My parents shrank in the aftermath, not theatrically, but in the ordinary way people shrink when the mirror stops flattering them. They sold the big house after my father's second gentle heart attack, moved to a condo where the neighbors are kind and the walls are thin. We exchanged 3 letters that sounded like tourists trying to speak a language they studied too late. No one said forgive. No one said forget. The words we did use, hope, health, holidays, felt like polite furniture in a room where truth wouldn't sit. I send them photos of my garden sometimes because the peonies make even silence look generous. They reply with a thumbs up and a note about the weather. Lena lives across town in a 3rd-floor walk-up with wide windows that encourage plants to brag. She reached out the spring Sophia turned 3, an email that read like it had been rewritten until the honesty shook free of the varnish. I don't expect anything, she wrote. I want to be a different mother than I was a sister. I'm learning late. I am late to a lot of things. Attached was a photo, a dark-haired toddler with a gap-toothed grin, hands stained with blueberries, eyes I recognized as mine, as hers, as the family's best argument against itself. I waited a week to answer. Different is good, I wrote back. Different is work. Send me Sophia's favorite picture book title. The one about the rabbit who becomes real, she replied. Of course it is, I wrote, and ordered 2 copies, one for Sophia, one for the shelf near my bed. We are not reconciled. We are not strangers. When schedule's not and she is sick or a sitter vanishes, Lena texts my name like a small emergency, and I go, if I can. I take Sophia to the park where the swings sing old songs, and the slide is always hotter than it should be. She calls me Aunt D, like she invented it, collects smooth stones from my pockets, announces complicated opinions about clouds. Once, when she was 4, she asked if weddings are for people who like cake. I said yes. I told her nothing about lilies. I told her nothing about silence. Some gifts are not objects, but omissions. Julian left the city in that first winter, took a job in a smaller place where people believed more slowly. I heard he tried honesty for 6 months and then let it go like a gym membership. Last year, a link arrived from a former colleague without a note. Another courtroom, another judge with steel hair, another woman who brought paperwork to a fire. I didn't click. Not because I couldn't bear it, but because the ending was already obvious. Some men are made of rehearsals. They don't know how to open without a script. I don't hate him anymore. Hatred is a diet of salt. It preserves you, but you can't live on it. On the 5th anniversary of the day that split my life into before and after, Eli drove us to the shore. He does this in summer sometimes, kidnaps me with sunscreen and a cooler, and pretends we are the kind of people who remember to relax. The beach was almost empty, a weekday blue stretched thin. We walked until the boardwalk gave up, and sand did what sand does, refuse shoes. I rolled my pants and let the water numb my ankles. In the distance, a wedding setup tried to balance vows with wind. The arch leaned. A woman in a headset frowned. The sea, unconcerned, kept saying its one long word. I had brought the smallest thing from the old box, the motel key, room 217, its plastic tag the color of guacamole and regret. It had lived for years in my nightstand, because some artifacts haunt politely. I turned it in my palm and felt, absurdly, grateful to the room that smelled like bleach and lies, the room where I learned how to hear myself when everyone else was speaking over me. You don't have to throw it, Eli said, reading my body the way he reads a painting in progress. Keeping something isn't the same as keeping it alive. I know, I said, and closed my fingers around the key. I'm not throwing it, I'm just showing it the ocean. We stood there a long time, doing nothing that would interest a camera. When we finally walked back, a gull screamed its endless sentence, and a child constructed a universe from wet sand and a plastic shovel. I looked at her small, bare feet and thought, fiercely, may she always believe she is the main character in her own life. That night, back home, I lit a candle, not for grief, not even for gratitude, but for the ordinary miracle that is this. I made a life, and then when it broke, I made another. On the wall above my desk hangs a charcoal drawing I did on a winter night after a long shift. The city in soft shadow, a single window lit. It looks like hope wearing better shoes. Beside it is a framed print of a stanza I copied in my own hand from a poet I love. Here I am, still whole, in a new way. I didn't need the poet to tell me this, but on bad mornings the reminder is a hand at my back. Sometimes, late, when the house is quiet the way a cat is quiet, on purpose, pleased with itself, I go out to the garden in my robe and stand in the honeysuckle and let the night polish me. The tomatoes smell green and arrogant. The wind fusses with the chimes I swore I'd take down and never did. I say my small inventory, my name, my work, the person sleeping inside, the child who will arrive tomorrow to show me a ladybug like it's brand new. I list the things I know that no one can steal again. I am not a rumor. I am not an alibi. I am not a prop at the edge of someone else's spotlight. I am Delara. I am the author. People like to say the truth sets you free. That sounds tidy. My truth was not a key. It was a hammer. I swung it until the wall cracked, and then I pulled stones with my bare hands until there was a door. On the other side was not paradise. It was a room with a chair and a lamp and a window that opened. It was enough. It was everything. If you were standing in my kitchen tonight, I'd pour you tea and tell you with the gentle arrogance of the healed. They tried to edit me out. In the margins, I wrote back, and somehow the margins became the page. The lily air in the church, the marble floor, the roar when the groom kissed the bride, the scene that once defined me. It's a paragraph now, just one I can turn when I choose. Sometimes I read it to remember the taste of the beginning. Sometimes I skip it and start where the story gets good. I leave the candle burning as I climb the stairs. In the hallway mirror, a woman glances back and looks like someone I'd be lucky to meet. At the top step, the dog thumps his tail once, twice. From the bedroom, Eli's voice, sleepy and simple. Lights? Almost, I say, just finishing the chapter. I blow the candle out. The room exhales. Tomorrow will arrive like it always does. Unimpressed, available. I will put on my badge, check the bus schedule, water the tomatoes, answer a text with a blueberry-smeared photo attached. I will remember the woman in the loft, and the woman in the motel, and the woman in the courtroom and thank them for their sturdy hands. And then I will go on. They thought my silence was their victory. It was my weapon. It was the page turning. It was the sound of the author choosing the next line.